This is TLC to go.
All right, welcome back, everybody, to the Deep Dive. We are so glad to have you here with us today, as always.
Yes, welcome back. We're excited for today's topic.
So today we are talking to you, our colleagues, our fellow health sciences faculty, because we know that you guys are really busy.
Oh, so busy.
And we're always looking for ways to be more effective teachers.
Exactly.
Without adding, a ton more to our plates.
Without adding more work. Yeah.
Because who has time for that?
Nobody.
No. So, in this deep dive, we are going to look at a teaching approach that's been getting a lot of attention lately. And actually, your own UTHSC Teaching and Learning Center has put out some resources on it. It's called the flipped classroom. Have you heard of this?
I have, yes. Flipped classroom. It's a really intriguing concept, and I think it has a lot of potential, particularly in health sciences education, where, we're really trying to cultivate those critical thinking skills in our students.
For sure. So to kind of give us like a basic definition here, the flipped classroom, and this is how Hurtubsie and their team defined it back in 2015, it's basically shifting that initial delivery of content outside of the traditional class time.
Mm-hmm.
So your students are engaging with the lectures, the readings, all that kind of stuff before they even step foot in the classroom.
Right. So traditionally, we think of the classroom as the place where we deliver information, right? The lecture hall, you're standing at the podium.
Right.
You're presenting the material. But with the flipped classroom, that kind of initial content delivery is happening outside of class. So they might be, watching a video lecture you've recorded, reading some assigned articles, maybe engaging with some online modules, that sort of
But then
thing.
what happens in the classroom, right? Because that's the kind of the flip, right?
Exactly. That's where the magic happens, right? Because now, instead of just passively listening to you deliver information, the students come to class already having that foundational knowledge, at least in theory. So now that face-to-face time becomes an opportunity for really active learning, right? You can do things like case studies. You can have them working collaboratively to solve problems. You can facilitate really in-depth discussions.
That's really cool because, if you think about it, and I'm sure this has happened to you, you spend all this time preparing this lecture, getting your slides together, and then you get to class and you feel like you're just talking at them.
Oh, yeah. All the time. And you can tell that maybe half of them, if you're lucky, are really engaged and absorbing it.
And the other half are on their phones.
Right. Or they're, dozing off.
Yeah, or they just look confused.
Exactly.
But so if they already have a basic understanding, like, they've watched the lecture or they've read the material, then you can actually have those really meaningful discussions and, go deeper. And actually see, okay, do they really understand this?
Absolutely. And that's what's so exciting about the flipped classroom model. It's not just about shifting where the content is delivered. It's about transforming what happens in the classroom. It's about making it more active, more engaging, and ultimately more effective for student learning.
Right. And I think, as health sciences faculty, that's something we're all striving for, right? We want our students to not just memorize facts, but to really be able to think critically and apply that knowledge in real-world situations.
For sure. And the UTHSC resource actually highlights this really well. They talk about how the flipped classroom aligns with the overall goals of health sciences education, where you're really trying to develop those clinical reasoning skills, that ability to analyze information, make judgments, solve problems in complex, often unpredictable situations.
Okay, so how does it actually work in practice, right? Like,
Yeah.
what are some of the key elements of a flipped classroom?
Yeah, so the UTHSC resource breaks it down into 4 main components. And I think these are really helpful to keep in mind if you're considering trying this out. So first, of course, is that pre-class exposure to the information. We've talked about that, making sure the students have access to the basic content before they come to class.
Right.
The second piece, and this is so crucial, is incentivizing preparation. Because let's be honest, if there's no motivation for students to actually do that pre-class work, it's not going to happen.
Right.
So you need to build in some kind of accountability.
Okay, so like how do you do that? Like what are some examples of, kind of incentivizing that preparation?
Yeah, so there are a lot of different approaches. You could, give them a short quiz at the beginning of class to check their understanding. That's a pretty common one. You could have them submit a brief summary of the key points from the reading, or maybe even have them come up with a question or two based on the material.
Oh, that's a good idea.
Yeah.
So they're not just kind of regurgitating information. They're actually having to think about it.
Exactly. And that kind of leads into the third element, which is assessing understanding. So whether it's through a quiz, a short writing assignment, or even just a quick discussion at the start of class, you need to have a way to gauge whether students have grasped the foundational concepts before you move into the more interactive activities.
Makes sense. And then the fourth element.
Right. So the fourth element is really the heart of the flipped classroom. It's about what you're doing during that face-to-face time to promote critical thinking. So this is why you're designing activities that require students to apply the knowledge they've gained, analyze complex scenarios, work collaboratively to solve problems, really engage with the material on a deeper level.
So it sounds like a lot of work for the instructor, right? Like not only are you creating the pre-class materials, but then you're also having to come up with all these new engaging in-class activities.
It definitely requires a shift in your approach to teaching. There's no doubt about that. But the UTHSC resource also emphasizes that you don't have to do everything at once. They suggest starting small.
Okay, I like that. Start small. Because I think that's what can be overwhelming, right? It's like, oh my gosh, I have to change everything.
Right, exactly. So pick one lesson or one topic within a course and experiment with flipping that. See how it goes, get feedback from your students, and then you can gradually expand from there.
That seems much more manageable. So if you're thinking, okay, I want to try this, I'm going to pick one lesson.
Yep.
How do you know how much pre-class work to assign? Because, we don't want to overload students either.
That's a really important consideration. And the UTHSC resource actually offers a helpful guideline. They suggest aiming for a 1.2 ratio of out-of-class to in-class work. So, for example, if you have a 2-hour class session, you might assign about an hour of pre-class work.
Okay, so like a 30-minute video lecture and then, maybe a short reading or something like that.
Exactly. And that way students come prepared, but they're not spending hours and hours on pre-work before they even get to your class.
Right. And I think the other thing that the UTHSC resource emphasizes is that it's really important to be transparent with your students about why you're doing this.
Absolutely. You need to explain the rationale behind the flipped classroom approach. Tell them how it's designed to benefit their learning. Help them understand that this isn't just about you giving them more work to do. It's about creating a more engaging and effective learning environment for everyone.
Right. Because if they don't buy into it, it's not going to work.
Exactly. You want them to be active participants in this process, not just, grudgingly doing the pre-class work because they have to.
Right. And I think especially in health sciences, where we're talking about really complex topics, it's so important for them to be actively engaged, right? They can't just passively absorb this information.
Absolutely. They need to be able to apply it, analyze it, think critically about it.
So if anyone listening is intrigued and they want to learn more, the UTHSC resource actually has links to some really helpful additional materials.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, they mentioned this do-it-yourself guide on flipping the classroom from Harvard University.
Oh, very cool.
And then there's a 2015 article by Moffat that has 12 tips for flipping your teaching.
That sounds really practical and useful.
Yeah. So there's a lot out there.
There are a lot of great resources for those who are interested in exploring this further.
So to kind of sum up here, the flipped classroom is really a shift in how we think about teaching, particularly in health sciences education. It moves away from that traditional lecture-based format and creates a more dynamic, engaging learning experience for students.
Exactly. And the evidence, which the UTHSC Teaching and Learning Center highlights really well in their resources, suggests that this approach can lead to some pretty impressive results, like improved student performance and, as we've been talking about, those critical thinking skills that are so essential in health sciences.
And it has the potential to make your job a little bit more enjoyable, too.
Sure.
Right? Because you're actually getting to have those meaningful interactions with your students.
Absolutely. And you're seeing them apply that knowledge, seeing them think critically, seeing them grapple with those complex concepts. It's much more rewarding than just lecturing at them for an hour.
Absolutely. So to kind of leave you with something to think about, as you're planning your courses and thinking about those challenging topics, those concepts that students always seem to struggle with, ask yourself, how could I experiment with the flipped classroom approach here? Could I try assigning, a short video or a reading before the next class and then use that class time for, like we were saying, a case study or a problem-solving activity?
Yeah, that's a great suggestion. Start small, pick one specific area, and just see what happens.
Exactly. And if you have any questions or you want to connect with colleagues who are already using this approach, you can always reach out to your own UTHSC Teaching and Learning Center.
They're a wonderful resource, and they're there to support you in your teaching endeavors.
Absolutely. Thanks for joining us for another deep dive.
And we'll see you next time.